Hi guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. I got an interesting question from somebody in one of the comments on one of my videos. I forget which one it was, but the person said, is there a list of principles and or tips that one can use when looking to invest in the greater antiques and collectibles marketplace? And I'll be very honest, when I started this particular channel, this was a topic that I wanted to avoid for the longest time, because one of the things that I wanted to do in this channel was create more of a thinking person's channel where I would give you the tools to analyze the greater antiques and collectibles marketplace as a whole, and I would also give you the way that I view, through my perspective, certain markets. That's why, like when I tell you guys that graded video games are in a speculative bubble, as are vintage Pokemon cards, as well as vintage Magic the Gathering cards, I can prove to you without a doubt that those markets right now are very speculative in nature, and by that nature, obvious caution should be taken if you're going to park large sums of money in those markets for the long term. Well, as I got thinking about this topic, I looked back at my years of experience in the trade, and I said, you know, I could put together a general list that are not specific to any collectibles and or antique categories specifically that I use when I look at items for investment and or long-term investment potential. So what I'm doing in this video, I'm giving you my generic top 10 tips that you can use if you want to become a better collector, a better speculator, and or a better investor in the greater trade. Again, these are all very generic, they're general, but if you follow these tips, you will be a lot more versed and successful than a lot of the people that populate some of the more speculative in nature online collecting forums who don't understand the fundamentals of the greater trade. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into this list, and some of these tips are more important than others, so I'm going to emphasize them as we go along. So tip number one, have a written plan. This is something I want to talk about a little bit because it's very important, and I see a lot of people who engage in the antiques and collectibles trade just from a financial standpoint. They don't have anything written down. What a written plan should include is, I don't care if you're a collector, a speculator, an investor, and or just even a casual collector who goes out and maybe buys 10 or 20 amiibos a year and a couple of graded or regular raw video games and just keeps them on a shelf. You still have to have a written plan. What this plan should include, it should be a detailed listing of what you want to achieve with your particular collection, how much money you want to allocate to that collection, a want list of items that you're looking to buy at some point either now or in the near future should be on this plan, what rate of return you expect to get from these items if you are buying for short-term speculation or long-term investment, and also at what point are you going to sell these items? Meaning there has to be some exit strategy involved in this type of investment. You know, when you invest in Wall Street, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, all those investments are very liquid, meaning it doesn't matter if my IBM stock goes from $132 to $180 a share, or if it goes from $180 a share all the way down to $90 a share. All I have to do is type a couple of strokes on the keyboard, and I can buy or sell stock at any time, and roughly within 72 hours, that money will appear in my brokerage account free or clear. Wall Street is very liquid. The greater antiques and collectibles trade is not that liquid in most cases. There are certain areas of the market that I've discussed before, coins and currency, higher end art, certain items that have a very scarce connotation to them that are more liquid than others. But overall, the antiques and collectibles trade does not compare to Wall Street in the form of liquidity. So you need to also talk about having an exit plan, an exit strategy for your holdings. whether you want to look at them as holdings or not. However you view your collection, you still have to have an exit plan, so that you're not like one of the Atari collectors that started collecting Atari games back in 1995 and are now coming to realize that their collection that they assembled is now selling for a 70% loss if they would liquidate the collection today. You have to have that mindset. And the way you get that mindset is if you develop a plan. Another thing you have to keep in mind is when you develop this plan, you have to write out what's on your want list and what the current market value of the items on that want list currently are. The reason why this is important is if you come to me and let's say that you want to collect vintage graded Magic the Gathering cards, all in either PSA 10 or BGS 9, 9.5 condition, and you list out all these cards on a list and you have 10 of them, and I look at your list and I say, well, wow, to buy all 10 of these cards, you're going to spend 100 grand. And you look at me and you go, yeah, I know. And I look at you and I say, well, how much money do you earn a year? And you tell me $30,000 or $40,000. Well, guess what? You might want to have more realistic expectations than to put $100,000 worth of items in a list that you think that you're going to achieve in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, or even 10 years. That's not a realistic goal. Writing out a plan allows you to assess the market and have realistic goals in relation to having a plan of action. Okay? I think everybody's clear on that, so I'm going to go to step number 2. My top tip, my second top tip is if you are engaging in short-term speculation, specialize. If you are engaging in long-term investment, diversify. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go on any of these online collecting forums, whether it be Nintendo Age, BrickPicker.com, the CGC comic collecting forums, even a lot of the forums devoted to vintage toys, and I'm not going to name them all, you're going to find an interesting characteristic. A lot of the people operating on these forums are not just members of one forum. They're members of like 4 or 5 other collecting forums that are devoted to different collecting categories. Well, I can tell you this firsthand. If you are what I consider a novice and or intermediate collector or speculator, you should be specializing. You should not be engaged in multiple collecting hobbies like this at once because you only have limited resources, mainly money and time, to use for those collecting hobbies. So for instance, if you want to flip video games, by all means, flip video games, but specialize in video games. If you want to flip Lego sets, go ahead, flip Lego sets. I've done videos on the Lego collecting market. I could tell you all about it. For short-term speculation, for certain people who have the patience and the understanding of how that market works, you can make money in it. But then focus on the Lego market. Don't try to speculate in Legos, video games, amiibos, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, because you're spreading yourself too thin. You cannot keep up with the movement of all those markets at once. Focus on one market at a time. Become a master of it. Then, if you want to branch out into another collecting category to start speculating in for the short term, by all means do it. Now, that's different than the advice I give somebody who wants to build a long-term investment portfolio in the greater trade. If you're doing that, you have to diversify. I'll take myself, for instance. I collect, for long-term investment, coins, currency, collectible first edition books, historical documents, and also art. Now, in those 5 categories, I am very diversified. Obviously, the collecting category that I do tend to favor is coins and currency. Second to that would be a tie between historical documents and first edition collectible books. You have to understand something though, guys. All those markets are cyclical. So in one aspect, like right now, collectible first edition books are becoming very hot. So I had to pull back my buying in that market. Otherwise, I'm going to be buying at the top end of what I call a bubble or a peak in that particular collecting category. I like to buy in markets that are more on a down peak, but are stable to the point that I know they're going to exist 10, 20, 40, 50, 100 years out. So that's why, like right now, I'm buying a lot of pieces of currency, graded paper money. Reason being is I know that market, and I also know that it's not in a speculative bubble. So if I'm going to place my money in a market for long-term growth, I want to buy at not the peak, but I want to buy near the bottom of that market in that current cycle. Remember, antiques are cyclical. Collectibles are linear. You got to understand that. That's why when I look at the collectible first edition book market, you can kind of see it goes like this over time. Well, I don't want to buy it when it's on the upswing. I want to buy it when it's on the downswing. So right now, I'm not spending too much money buying collectible first edition books for that reason. Does that make sense? I know that that lesson can be very important, but a lot of people don't understand that if you're going to engage in short-term speculation, you should specialize. If you're going to engage in long-term investments in the greater antiques and collectibles trade, you need to diversify. You don't have to diversify much. You just have to have assets in different markets. And I already told you what markets I use, what 5 I go to for long-term capital appreciation and or stability. So enough on that concept. Let's go to number 3. Top tip number 3. Know your markets. Research is key. I don't care if you have to spend a Saturday or a Sunday at Barnes & Noble and you sit there, buy a $2 or $3 cup of coffee, and you read literally books on the greater antiques and collectibles trade. In some of the videos that I've done before, I pointed out what books I recommend. If you want me to do another video telling you what books you should be reading in relation to what collecting category you want to study, or if you want to study the trade overall, please put a comment in the comment section and I will work on another video on that for you guys. This is a very important topic. Most people make the mistake when they engage in speculation and or collecting of mass market pop culture based collectibles. They join an online collecting forum that is populated by speculators, people with no market fundamentals or understanding of those market fundamentals. That is a recipe for disaster. You do not want to start collecting comic books by listening to people on the greater CGC graded comic book collecting forum. Just like if you're going to collect video games, there's a lot of good knowledge on Nintendo Age, but there's also a lot of starry-eyed speculators that don't understand the market dynamics, that think their copy of a factory seal copy of Xanadu or Cobra Triangle is going to increase in value year after year. That is subsequently false. First of all, not to go off topic, but those are second or third tier Nintendo games. Why you're trying to invest in Xanadu or Cobra Triangle, whether it's factory sealed or graded, whatever, I have no idea, but that's on you. However, there are markets and ways to learn markets through books that are out there in print, through even other online forums and or posts that I can show you on the internet, where if you want to gain knowledge into the collectibles trade or even the antiques trade, there's a lot of educated people that put together articles or websites or blogs on those particular topics that I can share with you in another video. So that's number 3. Number 4 should be self-explanatory. Do business with trusted, vetted dealers and or highly professional and respected auction houses. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you want to start collecting CGC graded comic books or graded coins or graded currency or first edition collectible books or historical documents, I'm going to tell you probably to go to heritage.com or Swan Auction Galleries or Comic Link, or do business with Greg Reese, who is an excellent comic dealer in my opinion. So is Bob Storms. You know, you want to do business with people who are ethical and people who will work with you. Yes, in certain instances, you will pay a little bit more. That's why I like auction sites, because if you're a disciplined buyer and or collector and or investor, you can pretty much train yourself where if somebody outbids you on something and you are only willing to pay $1,500 for a certain item and the bid's up to $1,600, well, you have to train yourself that, guess what? In your mind, that item's only worth $1,500, so that person's overpaying. And you can learn how to control yourself and make better decisions overall. So that should be a very basic tip. Number 5, store truly valuable items off-site or in a safety deposit box. You know, one of the questions that I get asked through the articles that I write through Antiques and Auction News, and even you'll see some comments sometimes in some of these videos, now that I have over 300 subscribers, where people ask me, well, aren't you concerned where if people know that you live in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, and you have access to all these valuable antiques and collectibles, that someone may come and try to kill you or rob you or take your possessions? And I always laugh and I say, yeah, there's some items around my house that probably have more value than what most people have in their house. But ultimately, all my really valuable stuff is either in off-site climate-controlled storage or in safety deposit boxes. Now, I will be doing an upcoming video to talk about how to store items either through climate-controlled off-site storage and or safety deposit boxes, because there are risks to storing items in those locations as well that we do need to discuss. But ultimately, you should not be keeping coins, currency, historical documents, collectible first edition books, any of that type of stuff in your home residence. I understand that some people have an emotional attachment to these items. I get it. But you also have to protect your own interests and your family's interest. If you have a girlfriend, someone that you live with, or if you're married, have kids, you have to put their interests above your own. So you want to store this stuff outside of your primary residence. I usually tell people this: if it's worth more than $1,000, and some people even say even if it's worth more than $500, don't store it in your house. Now that gets very hard to do for certain collecting categories. For instance, if you collect vintage advertising, a lot of the pieces that you're going to hang on your walls and around your house are going to be valued at more than $500. It's just the way the market is, guys. So you really have to look into your holdings and understand what should be stored in your house versus what should be stored either in a bank safety deposit box or through off-site climate-controlled storage. Again, more on that in an upcoming video. Number 6, record all purchases and save all paperwork and invoices. Meaning, if you go on Heritage Auctions and you buy a graded coin or a graded comic book or what have you, they're going to send you an electronic copy of your invoice, and they're also going to send you a copy of that invoice with the item in question. Save all that paperwork. I don't care if you're just a collector. I don't care if you're a speculator. I don't care if you're an investor. Save that paperwork. If you get into high-end antiques and you buy from very well-to-do established dealers, that paperwork is going to serve as provenance. And because you're going to have a chain of custody, it's actually going to increase the value of that item even more. Most people don't realize that. That's why there's benefits to dealing with some of the top-tier dealers in the greater antiques trade if you're into antiques. Because even if you buy something, it serves as provenance that you bought it from them. It's a record of history. That's very important. For those of you that get into higher-end collectibles like Rolex watches, if you go out and you buy a Rolex watch, save even the bag it came in from the jeweler or whoever you bought it from. That type of item will increase the value of that collectible significantly, assuming it becomes collectible on the secondary market at some point in the future. Very important tip. Number 7, understand size and scale. This is something that sometimes I don't think speculators understand. If you're going to start collecting pinball machines, which, to be fair, pinball machines have gone up in value dramatically over the last 5, 10, 15 years. But what you got to understand, if you're going to start collecting those items, they're very illiquid because the average person that is in the market for a pinball machine also understands that there's costs of transporting an item that large, and there's also costs to basically buy and sell an item like that. So it's not a practical item to invest in. Neither is classic cars, vintage slot machines, stand-up arcade video game machines, which the market for that has been horrible in recent years. But those type of items, you have to use caution. if you're going into those markets for that very reason. They're just not practical. The average person is not going to go to an antique fair or a swap meet and buy a stand-up arcade machine just like that, because you have to have the money and the means to store it, to move it, transport it, etc., etc. Self-explanatory. Go after rarity and investment-grade antiques whenever possible. This is a very important lesson in the trade. Listen, I've said this before. An investment-grade antique and or collectible consists of an item in the top 10 to 15% of that collecting category. What do I mean by that? Well, I've used this example before. I'll use it again. Let's say that you collect CGC graded comic books, and you want to go after a giant size X-Men 1 in CGC 9.2 condition. That is not an investment grade collectible. Yes, it's a key comic. So is Amazing Spider-Man 300. However, the problem is too many exist, too many were graded, too many were hoarded. If you want to investment grade giant size X-Men 1 CGC graded, you're going to have to go after a 9.6 or better. If you want an investment grade Amazing Spider-Man 300, you're going to have to go after a CGC 9.8 or higher. Too many exist on the open market. A 9.6 or a 9.4 of an Amazing Spider-Man 300 is not an investment grade collectible. Keep that in mind, guys. Avoid items you do not understand. And this is something that you really have to have a long talk with yourself and understand if you have the patience and the ability and also the time to learn some of these sophisticated markets. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Coins and currency is not for everybody. I will never ever tell you that to be successful in the greater antiques and collectibles trade and or to build an investment grade portfolio, you have to collect coins and currency. What I will tell you is, if you're going to learn the coin and currency markets, that's a very sophisticated market in the greater trade. It's going to take time, it's going to take money, and it's going to take resources to learn those markets. They are not for everybody. There's a lot of people that make the mistake, they want to quote-unquote invest in coins, so they research, well, give me some names and grades of investment grade coins, and they go on Heritage, not understanding the differences between grading, between premium quality coins, between toning, between CAC stickered coins, and they start bidding up coins, and guess what happens? When they go to sell those coins back onto the market, they end up losing their proverbial ass because they didn't know what they were doing in the first place. I did a video on how to get in to collecting investment grade coins. You have to start with a lot of research and a lot of understanding and patience over how those markets work. That's one such example. Same thing can be said for a lot of your more sophisticated markets on the antique side of the trade. Meaning if you're going to collect American cut glass, bottles, Tiffany glass, art pottery, all those markets take time to learn. Same thing is true with furniture. Same thing is true with art. Those markets take a lot of time and resources to learn. They're worth learning. I'll tell you that firsthand. But you're really going to put in the hours to do it. And a lot of people on these markets that are just looking for the next big thing, whether it be Lego sets or video games or magic cards or Pokemon cards or graded video games, they don't want to take the time to learn more complex collecting markets. They just see the easy money and they go after it. And that's partially not their fault, but a lot of the fault in doing that lies with them because they're in control of their actions, if you get what I'm saying here. So, let's go to top tip number 10. We're at the last tip, guys. Take a logical approach. I cannot stress this enough. This is going to be some of the best advice I'm going to give you. Let me give you a primary example. For those of you that are a fan of Rudy with Alpha Investments, I agree 100% on one of the things that he says when he talks about buying sealed booster boxes as opposed to individual cards. In the Magic the Gathering marketplace, factory sealed, vintage, reserved list booster boxes are by far one of the best investments, in my opinion, you can make if you buy right. I'm not telling you to go out and buy boxes of Fallen Empires or Ice Age or Homelands. But if you're going after items like Stronghold, Exodus, Tempest, Mirage, Vintage, Visions, Weatherlight, items from that coveted era. And you're buying authentic, factory sealed booster boxes. I can assure you one thing. You will most likely, on average, do better than the person that's going out there buying a graded reserve list card of City of Traders or Lion's Eye Diamond. Items of that nature. You want to go after, through a logical approach, the items that you can buy at the best possible price that have the best chance of appreciating. Now, do we know what the market's going to do for a Lion's Eye Diamond 5, 10, 15, 20 years out? No, but I can tell you this. If the current trajectory of what's happening in the vintage market for Magic the Gathering holds, a factory seal booster box of Mirage is going to be worth a lot more 5 or 10 years from now than it is today. That's not to say I agree with speculating and or long-term investment in those items. What I'm trying to use as an example in this tip is you have to use a logical approach. It is better to buy a factory seal booster box of Mirage than buying an individual card and speculating on that in Magic the Gathering. Now, Pokemon's a little bit different. When you guys get in the Pokemon, what you really want to do is you want to go after vintage Wizards of the Coast factory sealed booster boxes. That's my best advice if you're going to collect vintage Pokemon cards. For instance, go after your factory sealed first edition Fossil booster boxes, Jungle, Team Rocket, items of that nature. That's what I would be buying if I was doing that long term. Do I agree with that investment strategy? Yes and no. More on that in an upcoming video. So guys, I hope this list of tips and how I describe them will help you not only in your collecting journey, but also if you want to become a speculator or if you want to get into investing in higher end antiques and collectibles. This is some advice that's very practical that is used by a lot of the experts in the trade that I just shared with you. So please, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're a new subscriber, I thank you for watching this particular video. I know it was quite long, but I had to do a video like this where I break down these tips because I know I have some new subscribers out there that may not understand the approach I'm taking with this particular YouTube channel and how I want you guys to have an understanding of the fundamentals of the market as a whole. So thank you. I wish you a great night. And as always, I love all my subscribers. I love all the comments I receive, good or bad or indifferent. Thank you guys. Have a great night.